Hello and welcome to Crucio.
Oh, jeez. I was not ready for that.
No, you were not ready for what is that? Is it a fatal curse? Crucio's the torture one, right? An unforgivable curse.
I haven't read any of those books.
You know, it's really funny actually, and this will, I swear this will connect with what we're doing. By the way, the wand I got at DragonCon. It has a jade handle and is some kind of wood. I forgot the type of wood. It's part of my plan to begin to convince people that I am in fact a wizard. Because I'm going to do I want people to think I'm a wizard, but I don't want to do like the Alan Moore thing where it's like, oh, hey, everybody, I'm a wizard. No, I want them to get that idea in their own head. I want to incept them.
my wand is made out of Detroit steel and American Coca-Cola wood, and it was designed by John Moses Browning. So
nice. That's okay. That one would probably hurt a lot more than my unforgivable curse from the transphobe. All right.
Ask the Germans about the unforgivable 45 ACP.
Okay. So hello and welcome. This is Insurrection with Brenton Lengel, special Ukraine edition. So people have been wanting to hear me and have been asking me to talk about Ukraine for quite a while, because I think people are wondering about like what my opinions on it are. And honestly, it's something that if you've been following me on like any of my other social media, it's something that I've actually been pretty vocal about, just not on YouTube. So, I wanted to kind of get a chance. The problem was that, while the war was going on, I was working on a comic book about Ukraine, Darude #2 with Nestor Makhno, and it's like one of those things, like the whole world is coming to an end and you're like, hey, does anybody need any comics? I was doing that, and then I had DragonCon to get ready for, and then I was at DragonCon, and then I got COVID, which is the other thing that I got a wand and COVID. And I have just recovered from COVID, followed by immediately by a terrible sinus infection that was worse than COVID. So here we are. I am making my sacrifice to the gods of the algorithm, and I am talking with Bobby B of the Mustache Mafia Podcast. Bobby, do you want to introduce yourself to the uninitiated?
Oh, hey, everybody. You might know me if you're a fan of Brenton's from our series on Homage to Catalonia, which was George Orwell's excellent literary masterpiece about the Spanish Civil War. And you might know me from my channel, which you should definitely go subscribe to and like all my videos, because you can hear the dulcet tones of my voice all the time.
It is a lovely voice.
Yeah, I've been told, but I hate the sound of it.
Yeah. Now, people have wanted to know, perhaps, what I think about this particular war, which is, of course, a war against encroaching No, I'm kidding.
Oh man,
encroaching Western imperialism.
you had me scared there for a second there, buddy.
No, you've been tracking this longer than I have. Yeah. I remember you kind of warning me about this and being like, I got some people that kind of want to go to Ukraine to fight. And I'm like, you really think there's going to be a war?
Yeah, usually everybody always thinks there is going to be a war. For like the last decade or two of my life, I've been talking to people about this subject where I'm usually right in saying that there isn't going to be one. And this is like the one time when I was right, when I'm like, yeah, this is going to happen. And it did.
Yeah. Well, no, you were totally right. And just so that people know where I kind of stand on this whole thing. Yeah. Now, this is normally very basic, but this was actually handmade by my mom. Like, she blew glass. She even made the clasp a sunflower.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, because my family's more or less from the region. I don't know if we're exactly Ukrainian, but the particular village that I can actually trace my mother's side of the family back to in the Carpathian Mountains, I think changed hands between Russia and Poland and Ukraine several times. My great grandmother used to tell my grandmother about Cossacks riding into the village and pushing everyone around. So,
and you have family in Kentucky, right? You have roots there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so yeah. Well, I don't know about roots, but yes, I have family in Kentucky.
Because it's kind of ironic, because the Cossacks were basically frontiers people, which is how that group started out. So you've got roots on both sides there.
Oh, that's great. Frontiersmen, one and all.
Yeah, that's basically what the word
Yeah.
meant originally. It's a fun
Cossack
fact.
meant frontiersmen or
Yeah, because
Ukraine?
no, Cossacks, because they would live out in like the boonies out in the steppe, basically.
Well, one of the things that's really interesting, I'm doing some stuff with Nestor Makhno, as I said, and his meeting with Buenaventura Durruti. That's the next issue, is the real life crossover between these two great anarchist leaders. And one of the things that I learned while like doing history on this is that Makhno, a lot of people think of like Cossacks as like thugs for the czars because a lot of them abandoned their democratic principles to become thugs for the czars and for the powerful and later on the Bolsheviks, I think. But like traditionally, Cossacks conducted themselves very much in the ways that anarchists would, which is another reason why anarchism took off in the Ukraine like it did. So yeah, they're overall like I have been kind of laser focused on this. Like it's been like I was kind of when I first started seeing like the video of like the Russian shells like flying through the freaking air, and of course they had like some terrible techno or anime music to it.
Yeah.
Because we live in a society.
Eastern Europe, brother. It's a weird
my
place.
God. And like, so I'm just like watching this and I'm just like, what the fuck is happening?
We'll get into it more, but have you heard the VDV song?
Yes, you sent that to me.
Yeah, I did.
And that is hilarious.
It's great.
That was, yeah, the VDV, that's their like elite, like
yeah, it's their paratroopers.
Yeah, okay. So what, they're like Green Berets or
no, it'd be like so we'll get into it more, but the VDV, and we're going to be talking, I guess, a lot about the Russian military establishment. The VDV, which stands for something in Russian that I can't quite pronounce, is the Russian Airborne. So they're paratroopers. In the Soviet Union, they were somewhat elite light infantry. And then after the fall of the Soviet Union, they became the strategic reserve of the Russian military. So they were meant to have light, fast equipment that could get in, hold an area, and then have the heavier troops coming in behind them. So they were nominally elite. But what happened since the fall of the wall in 91 is that you had Putin come in with his far-right ideology and his toxic masculinity, basically, that he's promoting. And instead of being an elite paratrooper division, what the VDV wound up being was a parade division that was recruited specifically for guys who looked masculine and who would be tough, who would look tough. And the Russians assumed that they were tough
because they look like a bunch of Chads. So
exactly.
There's a Spanish military unit like that. I can't think what it was, but I heard about them, and like I looked up their pictures and they just shredded.
Oh, with the shirts that are like halfway open, yeah?
Yeah, shirts that are halfway, like an entire unit of Fabios.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of countries maintained like palace guard divisions back in the day that were specifically meant to look like that, but they were always, well, usually, not always, looked down upon by the people who actually did the fighting because they were parade militaries that didn't actually fight.
Oh, and by the way, just to jump in here with bro, I saw I thought you shaved your head. Yeah, well, so funny thing, I sort of did. This is like I did the Viking kind of undercut thing here, and the woman cut it way too short. Like I had asked her for it to go 4 inches past my shoulders, and she did it 4 inches above. And I was just like sitting there in the barber's chair, like, well, she made the first cut. I better let her finish. So now I either look like this, or I look like Anton Chigurh. And but yeah, anyway, so I did it, and then like people were instantly like, holy shit, you aged like 20 years.
Oh no.
Because all of my gray hair is at my temples for the most part, and it was completely covered up by all my other hair.
Oh man, that's brutal.
Yeah, I may one day shave my head again. I had my head shaved in high school. I was attending this all boys high school, and I was on the swim team. I was a very good swimmer, and kind of in the A relay. And we were going to this really big meet, and basically they were like, hey, you should shave your head with the rest of the team so that we can swim faster. And I'm like, well, I think I'll just wear a swim cap, because I really liked my hair. And they actually broke into my hotel room the night before, shaved a streak down the middle with like a electric razor, and then we're like, hey, okay, do whatever you want with it now.
We had to take a tape test when I was in the military, and I'm a big old Barry kind of hairy Italian hair farmer guy, and they tape you around the neck and then they tape you around your waistline. So the day before we got taped, one of my friends shaved a line around my stomach.
so they could
do it. So I went and I took my shirt off, and that was a big crack up.
Why did they tape you? What is that?
If you're above their allowed weight, so like I'm 6'1", and my allowed weight I think was something like 190, which is not like it's not going to happen for me. I'm
6'1". I'm way above that. I'm aiming for 180. I will get there soon, but
I hope so, man. Good for you. But they tape you around the waist and then your neck, and then there's like an equation that gives them your body fat allegedly.
Based upon that sounds like bullshit.
It is. It's awful.
Yeah. But anyway, so I have been in like full-throated support of Ukraine as much as I can, like as an anarchist. Because fuck NATO, but also I like not dying in a nuclear holocaust. But by the way, fun fact about this, the one time I wore this on Modern Day Debate, I wore it specifically to trigger Nick Fuentes, and it worked.
Oh God, I remember that shit show.
Oh yeah, that was the one where everyone on the left was suddenly a race realist.
Where's my whiskey?
I got asked to do another one of those, and I probably will again sometime soon, even though it's very hard to talk mostly with people who are completely unserious about politics in every possible way. But I was, unfortunately, when they asked me to do it, the topic was going to be, was January 6th that bad? And I was like, yeah, dude, I've got COVID right now. So anyway, I'm sorry. We got completely off topic while we talked about my lovely hair. I'm gonna need to shave this down again soon. I'm gonna do the Viking thing for a while, but this is gonna get long again because I was so there's two kinds of guys with long hair. There's like the kinds of guys who have long hair and they do something with it and it looks good, and then there's the kinds of guys who have long hair and they're clearly just long because they're just letting it grow. And after like 2 years of lockdown, mine was getting in that direction. I'd be like in the shower trying to comb it, and I couldn't reach all the way down and have to flip it around and stuff. So yeah, but I guess the lesson in that is if you don't want the woman to cut your hair way too short, speak up, and or don't go to a super cuts at the last minute because you didn't make a salon appointment.
I can't talk. I'm rocking the Tommy Shelby. So
anyway, let's continue with what we've got. We're talking Ukraine.
Right.
Now, my perspective on this war, and I am slightly changing on this because as I learn a bit more, maybe we can talk about this.
Yeah, sure.
Was that like so when Putin invaded, very clearly threatening nuclear war if NATO meant to do anything at all about it. And I think that was a bluff. I hope to God that was a bluff, but I was pretty sure he was bluffing with the invasion to begin with. My feeling was this. Okay, no matter what, let's imagine some hypothetical world where NATO is evil, 100% evil, and Putin is 100% good and wants to liberate Ukraine and rescue the world from, Western imperialism and all this bullshit that's obviously not true. But
that's a weird world. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Let's just say the tankies are right. And it is exactly the way they think it is.
Yeah.
He still has to lose.
Let me just stretch for that one.
Say what?
Let me just stretch for that one here real quick. Okay.
Yeah. And my perspective on it was this. Okay, so he has just invaded another sovereign nation. He's thrown Westphalian, sovereignty out the window for the first time since World War II. With the explicit purpose of conquest. And he's threatening nuclear war and leveraging Russia's second strike capability against the United States. So there are two ways that can go. One, he wins and takes Ukraine and successfully defeats NATO or prevents NATO from fighting back with the threat of nuclear arms. And I think that if that ever happened or happens or whatever, I think that makes nuclear war inevitable. Because if that works, anytime he wants something, he's just going to do it again. And anyone who comes after him is just going to do it again. And a bunch of other nations are going to see that works, and they're going to start scrambling to develop their own second strike capability or just start threatening nuclear war whenever they want to do something. And eventually, someone's bluff is going to get called, and when it gets called, the nukes are going to start flying, and then everyone dies. So that was along with like countless other species on this planet. So, good or evil, socialism, all of that goes out the window when you are staring at the possibility of nuclear Armageddon and what is a step towards nuclear Armageddon and what is a step away from it. So that was kind of my outlook on this conflict. Now, I know you are I'm just a guy. You're like a two-term combat vet. You understand war in an incredibly nerdy and sometimes annoying way. So
that's pretty dead on accurate statement. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So how realistic is that fear and that perspective on the conflict?
So at the beginning, I shared your fear of nuclear war. I think I actually talked to you offline about it. If NATO and Russia got into a shooting conflict, especially if the United States and Russia got into a shooting conflict, there is a very, very real chance of nuclear war. For reasons that I'm sure we'll get into. I don't think that there's much of a risk of nuclear attacks in the Ukraine right now. Specifically, Russia wants to take Ukraine relatively intact. And they also don't want to open themselves up to any sort of counterstrike by launching. The other thing is that the Russians actually haven't taken their warheads out of storage, so they're not serious about launching yet.
Oh, so like the warheads are, even though they put like their nuclear forces on high alert and stuff, the missiles themselves are still in storage and can't be easily launched.
Yeah, the warheads specifically, but so like the alert that they put themselves on at the beginning of the war, and it's kind of good that you brought that up. It's like the fourth alert to actually like getting ready to launch. So it was a performative thing by Putin to try to kind of scare the West in that regard, and it didn't really work. Because mostly people know that we're not going to actually go to nuclear war over this at this point. But there was a danger at the beginning of it. I was also scared in, I think, 2014 when Russian and American planes were kind of flying at each other in Syria. But thankfully, nothing came of that either. We'd know because we wouldn't be talking about this.
Yeah, I didn't think Syria mattered enough. Like in not obviously Syria matters to the people that live there and people that have family there. But what I mean is like in terms of like global significance, global strategic significance, I didn't really see Russia, wanting to go to the mat and risk global annihilation over Syria. Like, they were clearly intent on keeping Assad in power, but beyond that, like, I don't think they really cared quite that much.
Right. I'll actually be doing a show sort of on that, hopefully in the next week, because I'll be covering the Wagner Group in more detail. But on the
yes, the Wagner Group. So I'm going to, you can tell me.
I did really quick wanted to give you kind of my perspective. Maybe it'll be useful to you about Ukraine versus Russia. And it's a quotation from Giuseppe Garibaldi, who's a guy that you're probably familiar with.
I've seen his statue.
In New York, it's a great statue. If you're not familiar with him, he was a leftist revolutionary who was instrumental in actually creating the nation of Italy in the late 1800s. During the Franco-Prussian War, the French Empire and the Prussian Empire went to war. And midway through the war, the French Empire became a republic. And when that happened, Garibaldi said, and I quote, "Yesterday I said to you, war to the death against a Bonaparte. Today I say to you, rescue the French Republic by any means. So when your choice is a flawed but liberal democratic Ukraine versus an imperialist, and I would personally argue fascist Russian invader, the choice is to obviously rescue the Ukrainian Republic or democracy, however we're going to refer to it, by any means possible. And that's my stance on that one.
Okay, yeah. So you're similar to me. Mine is more about averting nuclear war, and so like when at first I was absolutely terrified, you know, and then I saw like a tank getting towed by a
by a tractor, yeah,
and I'm just like, what is happening here?
That's what everybody did, because I'll give you a little bit of kind of military perspective on this. My whole military stint, we were always told that the Russian military was a near peer. So the United States military, frankly, doesn't have a peer on the planet, or frankly in history at this point. We're really good at blowing stuff up. But
yeah, nobody spends more on their military than the United States. Nobody has the kind of hardware that we have, and our entire military is designed almost entirely to attack, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, maneuver and circle destroy is pretty much our go-to. But the whole time we always thought that the Russians had their act together, that they were well trained, well equipped, that they had a lot of conscripts, but they had a core professional military that had equipment that wasn't quite on par with us, but they had a lot of tanks. And then at the beginning of this war, we found out that they had like a core of quote unquote professional guys that had semi-decent equipment, but no idea how to use it, lack of spare parts, and really awful doctrine. Because we've been focused for the last, since 2014, on a concept called DIME. In military science, DIME stands for diplomacy, information, military, and economics. And you leverage all of those elements of national power when you go to war, right? So the Russians for the last decade had been fairly good at leveraging DIME, because they would leverage their diplomacy to kind of form counter relationships to us. They would use their intelligence service famously to like do troll farms, but also to actually legitimately gather intelligence. Their military, while it's a paper tiger, they use the threat of it to kind of leverage their wants. And their economy, because it's not quite a command economy, but at the same time, because it is controlled so heavily by oligarchs who are loyal to the state, they could leverage their economic power towards national goals better than like a market economy like the United States. Because because we're like a market economy, and we really have to kind of cajole our contractors and military industrial complex with a lot of money into doing what we want, whereas the Russians can kind of command that a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you mentioned also because Russia has employed a lot of mercenaries in this conflict, or contractors. And you mentioned the Wagner Group.
Yes.
Which, if you guys don't know who that is, so that is the Russian version of Azov, except they're scarier and bigger and probably fascier.
Yeah, they're explicitly fascist. Actually, the Wagner Group has its roots in the fall of the wall, because its founder was a petty criminal who actually founded a hot dog cart after he got out of jail. And he leveraged that hot dog cart. This is a great story about the success of capitalism. He leveraged that hot dog cart into buying grocery stores. And then he leveraged those grocery stores into luxury restaurants. And he actually wound up serving Putin on a floating barge restaurant in St. Petersburg, which is how he got in with the political power there. And then from there, he started leveraging that relationship to provide concessions, literal food, to the Russian military. And from there, he nominally started a private military company. But what a lot of people don't understand about Wagner, and I'll be covering this in great detail, is that it's not technically a private military company, because it's made up of a lot of explicitly Russian Ministry of Defense personnel, a lot of people from GRU, which is kind of more of their special forces. They use Russian Ministry of Defense equipment, and they use Russian Ministry of Defense training facilities. What they've been doing since 2014, when they kind of debuted in Ukraine as the quote unquote little green men, who were Russian equipped troops that would go into different areas and commit war crimes, like executing political leaders, looting villages, and doing all kinds of awful stuff.
Okay, so like Blackwater, but like
if Blackwater was owned and operated by the United States government instead of being a private company.
Oh my. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it seems like Blackwater, their main thing was just carrying out atrocities against civilians. I don't think they've ever done a political assassination, as far as I know.
We have other people to do that.
Well, of course. Holy shit. All right. So yeah. So the Wagner Group, and I heard, I could be wrong about this, but I'd heard recently they were like almost completely wiped out. Is that true?
So I'm not a big fan of the Gray Zone. I don't know if you are, and I hope your audience isn't at this point. But the Gray,
I'm familiar with the Gray Zone. I know some
Yeah.
people that work with the Gray Zone. You know, I think some of their stuff that I liked early on, but no, it's not. The Gray Zone is a publication that I will hold at arm's length. They will occasionally have some good articles, but like, you want to be very careful about what you get from them.
So they did actually do a very good thing in the Ukraine, is that they had an interview with the Wagner Group at their forward command post, and they included the address in the shots. So they're interviewing a guy in front of a building, and you can see the address of the building.
Oh shit.
So the Ukrainians called in basically a grid square of artillery and wiped out a lot of the Wagner people.
Holy shit. Yeah. I didn't realize it was Gray Zone.
Yeah. So I've been like kind of tilting at Max Blumenthal every now and then, asking him when he's going to do his next Wagner interview, because I've got some friends who are real into geolocation.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
It's very interesting to kind of rub shoulders with these sectors, because like, you know, sometimes you're seeing something, you're like, I know that guy. Like, I guess it comes from just doing far left radical activism in New York. As long as I did, like, you'll run into just about everybody, which is both great and awful.
Yeah. So at the beginning of the war, I've talked to you about this on the Orwell series before. You know, when you analyze warfare, there's 3 levels you should analyze it at: the tactical, which is like man-to-man fighting; the operational, which would be like movements of like divisions and corps; and the strategic, which is like the giant big satellite picture, right? So at the beginning of the war, the Russian strategic goal, and everything I'm saying, by the way, guys, is accessible if you look into the internet and stuff. I'm not giving you anything classified, or nor am I claiming access to any of that. This is all open source intelligence.
Yeah, don't worry. This is not QAnon.
No, this is all.
Bobby is not my secret source.
No, dude. I wouldn't even want access.
Totally my secret source.
Oh god damn it!
Send me your money.
If I go to Gitmo, I'm fucking giving them your name, dude.
I'm sure they've already got it.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. But I've been waterboarded before. I ain't doing it again. But their strategic Russian goal at the beginning of the war, it seemed to be to decapitate the Zelensky government by taking Kiev, secure their gains in the Crimea and the Donbass, and to create a new Ukrainian government that would be a puppet of the Russian state.
Yeah.
And in service of that, they did a 2-pronged invasion where they invaded from their holdings that they already had from 2014, and then they invaded from the north through Belarus to try to take Kiev.
Right. And that was like the thing where they had like the Belarusian dictator, like he apparently had it shown in the background, like a battle map that showed possibly an invasion of Moldova.
So they've explicitly stated that their goal is to eventually get to Moldova, but that ain't happening.
No, I don't think they're going to get very far at all at this point.
No, sir.
Now, so there was a comment that we had earlier, and I wanted you to. So the numbers that I have been hearing, and keep in mind, you know, be conscious of any numbers that you hear thrown out, because, you know, as Orwell said at the end, like, everybody's got an agenda in war like this, and you need to be very, very careful, like, of any accounts you get from anyone, and like even Orwell, you know. So, I think that this is very similar in the sense that there's a lot of propaganda flying around. The Ukrainians are, you know, definitely, they're not even releasing, I think, the numbers of their casualties. But the Pentagon estimate was that something like 70 to 80,000 casualties altogether. Not so like, I think that number includes like contractors. I'm pretty sure, because you can correct me if I'm wrong, but casualties doesn't necessarily mean dead. It also means wounded. Is that correct? Like wounded and cannot fight?
And captured, yeah.
Okay, so casualties. So it's not 70 to 80,000 dead overall. It's not 70 to 80,000 dead Russian soldiers, but essentially 70,000 to 80,000 Russians have been effectively taken out of the fight.
Yes. I've seen it as low as 50, but I think the 70,000 is from more reliable sources at this point.
Yeah. There was also something like there was a leaked document from the Russians that pretty much confirmed those numbers are correct or close to correct.
Well, the other thing that you kind of have to take into account is the material losses for the Russians. And this is something that a lot of people aren't talking about on the news. So the sanctions that we put in place since 2014 and the extreme sanctions that we put in place since the invasion began have pretty much eliminated Russia's ability to acquire computer parts and circuit boards. So you might have seen a couple news stories about them looting appliances to get circuit boards for their tanks. So a lot of the advanced equipment that they're losing, they've lost up to like 40% of their modernized tank force at this point in the fighting, plus captured, plus all kinds of other armored personnel vehicles. A lot of their material assets are not replaceable. Whereas the Ukrainians are keep getting new military aid, the Russians have to produce it domestically, and they can't. So just today, the Ukrainians captured a T-90M, which is the second most modern tank that the Russians have. The most modern is the T-14, which hasn't been seen in the Ukraine because there's only like 15 of them in the world.
Holy shit.
So they captured a T-90M, which costs about $5 million to produce, and they can't produce more of them because they don't have access to the electronics. They've also lost like 133 aircraft, and they lost their Black Sea flagship, the Moskova.
I remember that. That was the one that blew up Snake Island or killed people on Snake Island. Yeah,
a lot of those guys lived. It turned out later.
Oh, yeah, because they were taken captive.
Yeah,
and then later on, that flagship got sunk. Russia has never been good at navying.
So there was a point at which they had a decent navy, but that was in like the 19th century. They never recovered from World War I with their surface fleet is their issue.
Yeah.
They
were trying to get, if I'm not mistaken, Tsar Nicholas II, one of the big mistakes he made was, again, trying to take a warm water port. And just getting the Navy completely obliterated in World War I, or maybe even slightly before.
It was before. It was the Russian-Japanese War over Port Arthur, which is in like Siberia. The Japanese basically obliterated the Russian battle fleet. And then World War II happened, and they lost a lot more surface stuff. And they kind of committed to submarines because it's easier and cheaper to build them. They have one aircraft carrier, and its dry dock just burned down with the aircraft carrier in it. That tells you how their aircraft fleet's doing. Because
originally people were horrified about the Russian Air Force. Like, I was sitting there, I remember watching this, and like this was right at the beginning of the conflict. Yeah. And I was kind of going back and forth on like, I don't know, maybe they really should do a no-fly zone because like at least just lay that line down, you know.
Well, NATO did a really good cyber warfare thing right at the beginning of this, is that the Russian Air Force actually requires the use of our GPS system in order to use smart munitions and do navigation. They don't have their own SAT system, right?
Holy shit.
They have a very small satellite asset system.
Oh, wow.
So we cut them off from GPS. So at the beginning of the war, they tried to kind of do what we did in Gulf War I, where they would go in, use smart bombs to take out air defense and the Ukrainian Air Force, but they didn't have GPS guidance. So their smart munitions missed a lot of the Ukrainian air defense.
This is putting a lot of, because I remember like Russians were getting lost.
Yeah.
Trying to get to Kiev. And then like also they were using their like normal smartphones, like on the actual normal internet.
Well, it's even worse than that. Their radios that they issued their troops, because the Russians make a big deal out of all their troops have radios, because radios are very modern, comrade, and Russian army, big and strong. They're using open radio transmissions. So they're basically using like Walmart walkie-talkies, and the Ukrainians were breaking in and playing music and mocking them on their radios.
I don't know if this was real, but there was
Yeah.
a meme or a picture going around where it said supposedly like, it was in like Cyrillic letters and shit. I can't read it, so it could have said anything, but
Sure.
like the translation that it was provided for it was like a road sign that had been redone with like, this way, go fuck yourself.
Yeah.
This
Oh
way,
yeah,
go fuck yourself. That way, go fuck yourself right back to Russia.
that did actually happen. I saw that same one.
That's
Oh man.
awesome. Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I feel like when you're getting invaded, you would just maybe destroy the sign as opposed to create a whole new sign. But I don't know how easy is it to make those signs.
Spite's a powerful motivator.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
And you know what? If anything that this war has shown, it's that we don't know shit about war.
Yeah. Well, the other funny thing is that they left a lot of the cell towers active because a lot of their commo depended on cell towers. So they're using open cell communication, which is intercepted by signals intelligence in the blink of an eye. But the other funny thing is that it's a new thing in warfare, kind of, is that all of the Ukrainian people pretty much have cell phones. So now you have like 40 million Ukrainians with cell phones who are all now intelligence operatives taking pictures of Russian columns and providing up-to-date intelligence to the Ukrainian resistance and military.
Which is, that's really incredible, because if you think about it, one of the things that I have thought about an anarchist revolution, an anarchist country, is the difficulty of dealing with the problem of professional armies and nuclear weapons. And I'm not saying that this has been solved, but when you're able to mobilize an entire populace to function essentially as a decentralized ad hoc intelligence network for you, like, I assume that really fucks with soldiers in a way that they weren't getting fucked with before.
Yeah, I mean, it happened a little bit in Iraq and Afghanistan, but those two countries don't have the same infrastructure that Ukraine does. So this is like a real kind of coming out party for that aspect of hybridized warfare at this point, which is something that ironically the Russians have been very good at in the world up until now. But now that they're kind of coming up against it, they don't have anything to deal with it. Disturbingly, on Russian state TV, just in the last week, they've been talking about bringing back Smersh tactics, which it's a thing from World War II. And if you're familiar with James Bond, you've probably heard the term. It means death to spies. So they're talking about doing like fascist, anti-partisan activity where they just start massacring people.
Oh shit! And because a lot of these people are civilian, and you wouldn't be able to tell. Oh god, that'll be bad.
And they just found a mass grave with like 400 people in it in a town that they retook. The Ukrainians
they liberated.
Yeah.
It's very disconcerting. Earlier on in the chat, we had here from Texan White Panther, who I always love his contributions. So thank you, comrade. Most of these countries that belong to the USSR want the USSR back. That is true. A lot of these countries do. And the thing is that part of that is they're longing for a time when they were a superpower in the world in a way that they never were before. And also, the past is always kind of seen with rosy glasses. The USSR, like, with the actual ideology that the USSR had, particularly at the beginning, I think it was important to kind of balance the capitalist ideology of the United States. Workers in the United States did much better when there was the threat of communism. Because and once the USSR crumbled, like when I was a kid, that's when they really started taking away the pensions, taking away the jobs, shipping everything overseas, treating workers like dirt because they weren't afraid anymore. So I guess if I could get like a do blank blank again, it would be make capitalists afraid again.
Yeah, but there are strong national movements in like the Baltic countries, obviously Ukraine now. Romania certainly doesn't want back into the Warsaw Pact, but that was largely because of Ceausescu. I think you're right in that like a lot of people in those countries might long for like a day where they didn't have to deal with like the problems in capitalism. But
Mhm.
I don't think that certainly doesn't, and I think you'll agree with me, doesn't translate into wanting Russian imperialism to take them over, because this war, like Ukraine has like a thriving tech sector, a huge agricultural sector, and a pretty
Mhm.
decent industrial base. And Russia has been practicing like a one resource extractive capitalism with like
Yeah.
coal and oil for decades. And
Which is
oh, sorry.
this is so people have talked about like authoritarianism in countries.
Right.
And a lot of them will blame it on socialism versus capitalism and stuff. If you look at a lot of these heavily authoritarian countries, Venezuela, Russia, Saudi Arabia, the thing that's going on in a lot of these countries is they are dependent on one or two major industries and resources. As a result of that, because their economy is not diversified, what happens is that one, it's very easy for one group to take total control of the country. You mentioned earlier in the United States, for instance, because we've got a market economy, to get the whole country moving in one direction, you need to cajole, you need to, propagandize. You've really got to work to try to get all of the different profitable sectors of the economy behind a particular government goal. Whereas in another country, where everything is owned and controlled and all of the money is coming from one or two industries that are dominated by just a couple of families, no matter what economic system you have, that is going to tend towards authoritarianism. You can have it in a capitalist economy, you can have it in a nominally socialist economy. The lack of diversity, a lot of times this is called like the paradox of plenty or the resource curse. It really exacerbates the problem of centralized power, in just the same way that God, there was a great thing I was going to say there, and then it jumped right out of my head. So I guess what I'm saying is that, when you look at countries that are heavily centralized with regard to their economy, simply because of the situation that the country is in, maybe they've got a shit ton of oil and not much else. You are always going to have a problem because power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And we have studies that prove this. Like, being a powerful individual has a similar effect on your brain as a traumatic brain injury. So when you become significantly more powerful than the other people around you, it makes you stupider. It makes you crueler. Like you lose compassion for people, and it makes you much more likely to cheat, lie, or steal. So it literally brain damages you and corrupts you. And so, of course, we see in these countries, regardless of the economic system that they happen to have, if just a few people can grab that power, bad things happen. And it also, and this was the thing that I was coming around to, it also makes those countries much more volatile because they are heavily tied to a single industry. So Venezuela, for instance, there's a huge amount made capitalists crowing about the economic problems in Venezuela under Maduro. This is because the price of oil crashed, and the majority of their economy is dependent on oil. So once you're not getting enough money from your oil because the market is saturated, that industry suffers, and then every other industry underneath it suffers, and the money dries up. In much the same way that, in the United States, when we had the crash of 2008, the money dried up because of a bunch of weird shit. We didn't lose anything. We still had the entire productive capabilities of the country, and the other industries in these countries still have their productive capability, but without the money to sustain the economy, everything just melts down. So all in all, like, there is a major reason why, like, Russia is as authoritarian as it is, both as a communist country and as a capitalist country. And a lot of that has to do with specifically the Russian economy. So that's me, being a fucking weirdo economics nerd because I spent entirely too long arguing with ANCAPs.
Yeah, well, it's also that Russia is operating on a different paradigm than we are. Like we in the democratic countries tend to think of government as being by consent necessarily,
Mhm.
whereas Russia, since Putin took over, I mean, they had a few good years of democracy before there was a parliamentary crisis with
Yeah.
Yeltsin, but that's a whole nother conversation. Um,
I don't know if I'd necessarily call those years good years. They were selling
well,
off a lot, but
yeah, well,
I get what you mean.
better years, I guess.
Mhm.
Where since the Putin takeover, it's much more based on imposing Putin's power and the regime's power on the country. And if you don't have consent, which the Russians, I would argue, kind of don't because they have to rig their elections and they have a huge police state, you have to have something to use against the people. And in the case of Russia, it's a militarized police force, literally, and the specter of having a military that can put down any kind of like uprising in the provinces, which
Yeah.
is why the country is divided into military districts, and the military was also organized around putting down security issues in those districts.
Which is
Uh,
very disturbing. Just it was one of the things that I will actually praise about the American system that we learned,
yeah,
with regard to January 6th. The American military is far less inclined to, I mean, it's specifically forbidden in the Constitution, but
yeah,
to take actions against the American people themselves. Like the military is as apolitical a unit as we can possibly have, at least within a liberal democratic capitalist society. And there's the stereotype that they're all super right wing, but clearly that's not true.
no, and we're also indoctrinated in the U.S. military to not do stuff like that and to not follow orders that would have us do that. Whereas in the Russian military, you have the Russian National Guard, which I'm going to mispronounce, is the I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. The Russian National Guard, which is specifically designed to do that. And you could see that in the initial invasion because there were a lot of Russian National Guard military police convoys that were being sent in to
Mhm.
impose Russian power on the Ukrainian people. Of course, those guys were not trained to fight a war and they weren't equipped to fight a war. So the Ukrainians now have a bunch of riot gear that they've also captured, which is, I mean,
Yeah.
good for them, I guess. But
I,
uh,
I I don't like riot gear on anyone,
no, but
unless you are fighting zombies. That is the one time riot gear is awesome. But
yeah.
yeah, the rest of the time, absolutely not.
So like when they did the invasion initially, you could see something that's happened in the Russian military too. And I always say this to people, and they always kind of look at me funny because when people see like the Russian Victory Day parade or the North Korean Independence Parade or whatever they call it, and the Chinese May Day parade when they march their armies through the squares in the dress uniforms and looking all pretty, and we don't do that in America. I tell people it's because parade armies don't fight. And you could see that in the Russian military that it was designed to be a parade army that was designed to impose fear on the Russian people because of their doctrine. So like when they were trying to do a thunder run into Kiev with like armored forces, if
Mhm.
you do an armored advance in like modern warfare, what you really want is like close air support. So you want like helicopters and jets and stuff above you. You want to have secure airspace too. You want to have your tanks going down the road staggered, so they're not in a straight line and they can cover each other. You want to have
Mhm.
light infantry dismounts and armored personnel carriers and like light trucks to root out dudes with missile launchers because
Yeah.
tanks are vulnerable.
Yeah,
Uh,
like the javelins, which have been so effective.
Incredibly effective. But what the Russians did was they just rolled their tanks down in like a straight line down the same road multiple days, and they got ganked by javelins all the time because they were legitimately expecting the Ukrainians to just collapse because they also believed their own propaganda that Ukraine's not a real country and that they're just going to like hug their Russian brothers and become part of Russia again. So when you
Mhm.
start to believe your own propaganda, you don't plan very well.
I
Uh,
am reminded. I am reminded of wand. I
yeah,
am reminded of George Bush thinking that the Americans were going to be greeted as liberators by the Iraqis.
exactly correct. and it didn't happen really there, and it certainly isn't happening in the Ukraine. The other thing they didn't take into account was that since 2014, we've been providing the Ukrainians with a lot of munitions, like the javelins you mentioned, a lot of modern NATO stuff, not necessarily like main battle tanks, but like artillery, mortars, infantry kit. You'll see a lot of Ukrainians look a lot like American soldiers now because they're using very similar kit. The other thing that they didn't count on was that we were also training up their core military. And a huge weakness of the Russian military is they have this kind of cult of heroism centered around Prince Bagration, who was a guy during the Napoleonic Wars who like was a heroic officer who led from the front and got shot. So they don't have like a developed NCO corps. They expect their officers to lead from the front.
And oh shit,
and it didn't work out. So like, a couple different things happened. Obviously, what you're thinking of is that a bunch of generals have been killed and captured during this conflict. A lot of officers have been killed and captured in this conflict. The other thing is that the enlisted guys don't have a culture of like leadership, like in a U.S. military or U.S. Army, like rifle platoon, right? You have like fire teams, which are 2 guys basically, and you have a team leader in that fire team. You have a squad leader, you have a platoon leader, and all of these guys and gals can kind of step up and do leadership roles. Whereas in the Russian army, if that officer gets taken out, you have like somebody who's theoretically a sergeant, but he hasn't been trained to lead. So they're
which I can say, as a guy who put food on the table as a manager for years, like if you're leading in any capacity, like one, you have to have the temperament for it. It's not something that anybody can do. And 2, you have to be trained and experienced in doing it, because like if you're not, there are huge mistakes that you can make simply because you just don't know completely what you're doing. A great example for me, and like I said, I've been in leadership positions my entire life, but like one of the big things that I was really surprised of was I was leading a hike one time, and I was putting my anarchist principles into practice. So we got to a point in the hike when I knew that the right decision was to turn around and go back. And I knew this because there were people within the hike who were kind of elderly, and they were sort of huffing and puffing and were really having trouble keeping up. And so I was like, okay, we got to go back. So I said, we're going to do a consensus process here. So we can either keep going or we can turn around a little early. And if there is one vote to turn around, we're going to turn around. It's got to be 100% consensus or nothing. And the people that I was sure were going to vote to turn around voted to continue, not because they wanted to, but because they didn't want to be the person that ruined everyone else's fun. Right. And it was at that moment that I realized, oh shit, leadership is a lot more complicated than I think it is.
Yeah, it's a weird thing in that. So like something else that's kind of happening that not a lot of people are talking about is that because Russia hasn't actually declared war on Ukraine, a lot of their professional contract soldiers are actually quitting the military.
Holy shit.
Because it's not a war they can technically kind of quit and leave.
It's a special military action.
Yeah.
With the fucking Z.
But at the same time, they're trying to really force their conscripts to sign contracts. There's been reports of like Russian officers what do you call it? Beating up conscripts until they sign a contract.
Oh shit!
Yeah, but
that's not entirely unlike what happened in Spain. There's a thing. So I'm writing the script for Daruti #3 right now, and people are going to read Daruti #3, and they're going to be like, "Come on, Brent." Like, okay, you think you're laying it on a little thick about this, and like literally everything that they think is me laying it on a little thick especially in #3 is just facts from history.
Weird stuff happens in warfare, man. Yeah, it's trippy.
Like one of the things they did, like I actually have a scene, spoiler, where Franco watches where General Godade he extracts a confession from an anarchist that he's captured by beating his 76-year-old mother in front of him, who was at the time, by the way, suffering from tuberculosis. That's real. Like, they literally beat the shit, like the Spanish police beat the shit out of like an old lady who had like a terminal illness just to get like her son to confess to crimes he probably didn't commit.
Yeah, so
or if he did, he was justified because they're fucking fascists. Fuck them.
Yeah.
But continue.
But it also shows you like the desperate situation of the Russian military, because at the beginning of this, you saw a lot of T-90s and a lot of modernized T-80s, which are not the calculator, but the tank. I don't know if they had T-80 calculators. If somebody's doing statistics homework in the war, maybe that's their business. But at this point, we're starting to see them roll out a lot of their old stocks of T-72s, and we're even seeing them issue T-62s to the Donbass militia guys. We're also seeing the fact that if you look at a Russian soldier that you're going to see on the news now, theoretically, that guy should have what's called a Ratnik gear, which means, I think, warrior in Russian. So he should have level 4 body armor. He should have a ballistic helmet. He should have a radio, night vision, an AK-12, which is the updated version of the AK-74 rifle, and all kinds of neat gear. What we're seeing is guys with like old AK-74s with like wood stocks on them, so you know they're really old.
So AK-74, that is...
Oh, so... Yeah, so in 74, the Russians realized, this is a little gun nerd stuff for you, the Russians, and we had the same realization around the same time, that like full power rifle cartridges are not fun to fire on full auto. So they switched over from the AK-47, which uses a 7.62 by 39 round. So it's a 30 caliber.
I am well acquainted with the AK-47 because of things that you know. I think I talked about it on this before.
Yeah. So they switched over to a 5.45 by 39, I believe, round, which is similar to our 5.56. So you can carry more rounds and the recoil's not as bad. So they switched over to that in the 70s.
And that's the AK-74.
That's the AK-74. There's some other minor changes like the flash hider and stuff, but if you look at it, it looks like a AK-47. They theoretically upgraded them to have synthetic stocks and all kinds of like accessory rails, but we're seeing issued like old AK-74s with like wood stocks on them and the old Bakelite magazines. And we're even seeing a few of the militia guys using Mosin Nagant bolt action rifles from World War II.
Holy shit! That's in the fucking Spanish Civil War.
Yeah, that Mosin gets around, brother. And I've also seen pictures of or tests of the Russian body armor that they've captured, where instead of ceramic ballistic plates, which if you're going to buy body armor, buy ceramic, they're using steel plates that can't stop Tokarev rounds, which are pistol rounds, and doesn't stop the AK-74 round. So their body armor is shit. And the other
but Bobby, I have seen on TV people block bullets with bar tables. Are you telling me that that's not the case?
No, it is not. It is not, in fact, the case. John Wick is a great movie, but no, like a 9mm pistol round will go right through your car door. Also, I sent you a picture of it earlier. I don't know if you have it. The Russians made a big deal out of making explosive reactive armor for their tanks. So there's a thing called high explosive anti-tank, and I won't bore you with the physics, but what it does is it creates a copper projectile that punctures through armor and blows up your tank. And during the Cold War, both us and the Russians developed a thing called explosive reactive armor, where when the heat munition hits the ERA basically detonates and pushes the projectile away so you don't die. But the Ukrainians have been finding that ERA on the Russian tanks, and they've opened it up and they found no explosives. They found them filled with like newspapers and cardboard. and that's a function of the fact that the Russian military, because of the fact that it's a failed right-wing institution, is extraordinarily corrupt. Russian domestic bases are routinely like extorted by like Vory Zakovna, Russian mafia people, for like money, and Russian quartermasters routinely sell parts on the black market. So they're going to war with stuff that's like listed as good, but then when you open up the ERA, the explosives have been sold to God knows who. The night vision goggles you can literally find on eBay. Like if you go on eBay right now and look for like Russian MVGs, you're going to find something that a quartermaster took out of the locker, filed off the serial number, and sold on eBay.
That's awesome. Now I kind of want to get that now.
Yeah.
And just like put them on and be like, hey guys,
I can see better than you, Ivan. Yeah. Another funny thing that's happening is that Russian trucks, they've lost so many trucks, by the way, that they're using dump trucks to carry around their troops. but the Russian military vehicles have been using Chinese tires that they bought from the Chinese military. And they can tell that the Russian vehicles haven't been taken out of the motor pool almost ever because there's sun damage on the tires from them sitting there. So the Russians have been getting flat tires on their trucks and having them stolen by the Ukrainians who have good tires
with tractors.
And there was actually an incident, I believe it was during the battle for Kiev, but it might have been more recent, where a Russian armored vehicle broke down and the Russians had to go to a junkyard to try to find parts. But while they were going to the junkyard, the Ukrainians went and stole more parts off of the vehicle. And then when they put their new parts on it, then they had to go back to the junkyard to find more parts. And then the Ukrainians stole the parts that they had put on it in the first place.
So it's a bunch of Ukrainians,
yeah,
and it's like they're stealing. What is it? The catalytic converters.
Yeah, basically. So they're like sitting in a building watching these guys work on the tank. And they're like, "Wait, he's gonna do something stupid," and then they leave.
And then never stop stealing, guys.
Yeah, and then they're sitting in the building. And they're like, "Do you think they're gonna do it again?" Oh, look, they're doing it again.
And then they sold it on eBay, and then I buy it.
Yeah, and it's getting even worse now because the offensive's still going on because the Ukrainians stopped the Russian advance, both on Kiev and in the south. And then they achieved operational surprise in a way that hasn't really happened, ironically, since in Europe, at least since like World War II with Operation Bagration, which is something that you guys should look up. It's kind of an interesting armored offensive. And they achieved operational surprise to the point where they've retaken 1,000 kilometers square of land from the Russian military.
It's beyond 1,000 now. I think it was at 3,000 last.
Oh, 3,000. Excuse me.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It started as 1,000 and then just kind of exploded from there. Because I thought real quickly, Bobby, before
of course.
Go back. So when I first saw this, the first thing I thought was, "Oh fuck, Russia's going to roll over Ukraine, and what this is going to be is it's going to be an Afghanistan style situation where." They take Kiev, maybe they take out the government, maybe they put in a puppet government, bring Yanukovych back or whatever. And then they're going to be dealing with a committed insurgency that is funded by the West. And they're just going to get bled for, 10, 20 years. And then, then when the assault on Kiev, so I always heard it as Kiev, but then I heard people saying that the Ukrainians call it Kiev and only the Russians call it Kiev, but that just sounds like liberal bullshit that somebody made up. Are you aware on the pronunciation here, Bobby?
Yeah, so in their language it is Kiev, and it is probably more respectful to pronounce it like that. It got anglicized as Kiev, and that's why I still do it because that's how I learned it as a kid. But
I think Kiev sounds better, quite personally. Kiev sounds like Kiev sounds like a character in Legend of Zelda: The Ocarina of Time.
well, it's a weird thing in language because we don't really call a lot of countries what they call themselves. You know what I mean? Like Germany's Deutschland, but we call them Germany for whatever reason. What
was it? That joke? It was you come over and you're like, "Hey, Indians," and they're like, "Actually, we're Eric. You're Indians."
Yeah. I just saw somebody post in here that the Wagner group was recruiting for the Russian army. They're recruiting assault infantry, which in terms of the Russian military means cannon fodder, and they're recruiting them from prisons because they can't find any more veterans.
Yeah. Now this is key. So the anarchists did some really good prison recruiting during the Spanish Civil War with regard to Catalonia. Famously, Oliver, Juan Garcia Oliver, one of Durruty's closest friends, he wound up becoming. So the anarchists did not want to step into a position of political leadership when it was offered to them for obvious reasons. Unfortunately, what happened was because they didn't and just focused on the revolution, those positions were filled by communists loyal to Moscow. Who then used those positions to try and suppress the anarchists in the name of military efficiency, and then got around to promptly losing the war. So what wound up happening was that the CNT's hand was forced, and Juan Garcia Oliver became the first anarchist minister of justice. And what he wound up doing was going specifically, the first thing he did was free every single prisoner within the Republican territory at that point. And literally went like prison to prison to prison and was like, okay, guys, so you are free. You can do whatever you want, but there's a bunch of fascists coming in. I don't know if the other countries are going to take you, and these people do not have your best interest at heart. So you can join us and fight them, or do whatever. You're free. What are you going to do? And the vast, vast, vast majority of these prisoners joined the anarchists and created what was called the Iron Column, which was one of the most effective fighting forces in the late Spanish Civil War, before it was again destroyed by the communists. In the name of military efficiency. God damn it.
Well, something very interesting, and I'm curious to see if it happens again, and we're probably not going to know about it for a few years. During World War II, Stalin tried the same thing, recruiting from prisons, for obvious reasons, because they were desperate for people. But there's a group in Russia, we refer to them a lot of times as the Russian Mafia, but it doesn't really translate. They're called the Voryazakovna. So they have a rule. Their number one rule is that you never cooperate with the government for anything, ever, period. Right.
Holy shit.
And you only ever make money by stealing, like, is another one of their rules.
Oh, they're fucking it's Eastern
Promises.
The Great Joys. They want you to pay the iron price.
Yeah, basically, exactly. So during World War II, when they were trying to recruit out of the prisons, there was a thing called the Suki Vionia, which means bitches war in English, where anybody who tried to enlist from the prison got shanked by the Vori. So I'm curious to see if that happens again. If there's
that
will
be very interesting. By the way, I did want to bring this up because so there's a thing that made the situation in anarchist Catalonia very, very different than the situation in Russia right now, or in Russia when Stalin was recruiting in his prisons. And that is that. So people have come up to me, around January 6th and before, for years before, and they're like, is the United States about to have a civil war? And I'd be like, no, we're not. In no way is that a possibility at this point. And the reason why is that, like, class warfare, and when I say class warfare, I mean warfare, had been broken out between the Spanish right and left, like, for decades, like for 30, 40 years before the Spanish Civil War. They'd already lived through one fascist government before Franco tried to take over the country,
and two Carlist wars.
Yeah, and so, like, a lot of the people in those prisons were in the prisons as political prisoners.
Right. These
were anarchists. These were people. These were pistolerismos. These were people who were engaged essentially in, insurgency and theft, and like against the bosses, against the church, and against the fascists. And so, like, there's a reason why, when those people came out of the military, like out of prison, and went straight into the military, a lot of them were already trained. A lot of them were already ideologically anarchists. And a lot of them were fighting this war before the war even started. So obviously, yeah, they're definitely going to join up and fight, and petty criminals at this point have probably been radicalized, because I don't know if you guys quite understand this. This is one of the things that I learned as an activist. So cops have this thing that they like to do, and they like to do it because it makes them feel powerful, and they think that they are really clamping down on dissent. So what they will do is they will arrest protesters at a protest, but they won't just arrest protesters. Anyone they see in the area, they will grab and toss into jail for like 24 hours. And like, that'll teach them. But here's the thing: you just took a normal person and you put them in a jail cell. So you've frightened them, you've disoriented them, and they've got no one to talk to for like a day, but a bunch of activists who only want to talk politics. So there was like no better engine for radicalizing people than normies getting arrested at a protest and spending time like that. That's why the 60s went as nuts as they did, because like suddenly like the kids of, middle class and sort of more well-to-do people were getting swept up by the police, thrown into prison, into jails with radicals, and learning about how garbage capitalism, and the United States penal system is. So when they come out, what do? They become activists, and then they go and they tell their parents. And then the parents usually listen to the kids, and suddenly like the whole thing starts to crumble. I guess the big thing is cops are stupid.
Well,
They're really stupid. And a lot of these strong arm tactics have the completely opposite effect on people. So anyway, that's my activist rant. Continue, Bobby.
Well, in the case of Wagner, they're specifically looking for violent offenders, armed robbers, murderers, and sex offenders.
Mm-hmm.
And that's already a institution that's famous for committing war crimes across Africa, the Middle East, and in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. So, like, unfortunately, I don't think we're going to get a lot of anarchists who are going to put on that Wagner patch. There are anarchists actually fighting. There was a famous anarchist leader whose name I can't remember, or famous, bigger anarchist figure who actually unfortunately just passed away in this recent counteroffensive.
Oh shit.
Yeah. So there's like some lefties are typically fighting on the side of Ukraine, and that should kind of show you how this conflict's shaping out.
Yeah, I know one of the Americans who was fighting in Ukraine and was wounded and then was coming back. I think he was fighting in Syria and may have been embedded with the PKK-YPG.
Oh yeah, I saw that. He was like a sniper. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, and you were even talking about it, like, with people doing, what Orwell did and going to, and by the way, guys, I am not telling anyone to do that. Please. I'm sorry, Bobby, you were gonna say.
I'll say it like right now. Like, if you have anything like going in your life at all, don't do it. Like, just don't. Like, there's ways that you can support them. If you can throw them a couple bucks, there's actually a program where you can donate money to the Ukrainian army to pay for artillery shells, and they'll write whatever you want on it. So there's like a lot of UU shells going over to hit the Russians.
I would never donate to a weapon. But what I will say is, there is actually, my wife and I got our wedding outfits done by a Ukrainian company called Arm Street. Yeah. They do like a lot of like armor and medieval stuff, Ren Fair kind of garb. But like really good, very high quality stuff that's actually very affordable. The thing that my wife got me for my birthday this year, one of them was a shirt put out by Arm Street, because they are in Ukraine, still functioning. And like, you can buy the shirt. It's got like a dude with like a fucking javelin on it. It says "Fight like a Ukrainian." Nice. And if you get the shirt, like you pay extra, and what they wind up doing is taking the profit from that shirt and using it to buy blankets, like for the Ukrainian forces. And that's incredibly important as we go into winter, and as like the Russians have been shelling a lot of power plants and shutting stuff down. So winter's probably going to be really hard.
You can also donate to the International Red Cross that's doing a lot of humanitarian relief over there. It's a pretty good organization.
Yeah, Doctors Without Borders. Yeah. Or send an UU shell. Like, yeah. I'm not going to do that, but that's objectively hilarious.
Yeah, it is great. Well, and you might not even need to at this point, because in this counteroffensive, they've captured like multiple ammo dumps of Russian equipment and munitions, a lot of which, again, because of the shortage of parts in Russia, they can't replace. Mm-hmm. So the Russians are losing ammo, they're losing gear, they're losing personnel at an incredibly high pace. They've been pushed back to the border in the north. They've lost an entire oblast in this last offensive, and their army hasn't really regrouped, so they're still in disarray. But the Ukrainians are going to probably, I think, in the next week or two, maybe slow down a little bit and kind of try to consolidate their gains, because the autumn rains are about to happen in the Ukraine, and when that happens, tanks, armored vehicles, and even trucks will get bogged down in mud, which
which
is
is
the
what
biggest
famously happened to Hitler.
in World War II. Exactly.
Yeah. So here's my question for you, Bobby. So I've been hearing a lot of things because the Ukrainians have, originally it was get the fuck out of Ukraine.
Right.
Now they've changed their demands after this really successful, very swift advance. Where, again, as I said, check this, but I'm pretty sure it's up to 3,000 square miles that they took. Now they're saying we're going to take back Donbass and
Luhansk. But those two provinces are not Russian provinces. They're Ukrainian provinces that the Russians have occupied since 2014.
Yeah.
So they're still saying get out of Ukraine.
Yeah. So they're saying, well, yes, but the point is that they're talking about that. They're talking about Crimea.
Yeah.
These are places that Russia has had 8 years to run dig in. Now, I will also point out the United States had 20 years in Afghanistan. We saw how quickly that folded.
Well,
so there was a comment earlier. I'm not going to bring it. So, and it was essentially that Russia could still win this if they sort of go all in. How do you feel about that? Do you feel that that's a possibility, or
so I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you.
Yeah.
So if they declared war and completely mobilized, right, they'd have to spin up T-72s and other tanks that have been sitting in storage, which is literally in a field. They'd have to equip like thousands and thousands of infantry with because they're running out of modern rifles. But if they did, we've already seen that even with a huge numerical advantage, their training is so poor and their military is so unable to carry out even basic maneuvers that their recourse would basically be to do human wave attacks, or saturation attacks is the technical term for that, on the Ukrainians. And we saw that doesn't really work out well for them. And I doubt that the people of the Russian Federation are going to put up with 100,000 losses, which they're nearing, but I sure as hell don't think that they're going to put up with like 200,000 losses. And if they keep losing equipment at the rate that they're doing, it's going to compromise their military's ability to carry out its domestic mission, and it's going to compromise their ability to carry out their defense mission against other countries. In theory, we're already seeing the collapse of Russian imperial power because they have their own separate alliance called the CTSO, which is like a parallel kind of NATO that they tried to do. But we're seeing that collapse with Armenia and Azerbaijan having a border conflict, and the Russians are supposed to guarantee security in that area, and they can't because they lack the equipment and trained soldiers to do it. And we discussed earlier, their VDV, their elite mobile reserve, basically doesn't exist anymore. They lost multiple transport planes. They lost officers. They dropped dudes into the Black Sea in an airdrop and let them drown. They're probably not going to do a whole lot better by just throwing conscripts at the problem until it goes away. That didn't work out for them in World War II. I mean, they only started winning in World War II after they started getting like tactical parity with the German military after like 42 and 43. And they are not going to get tactical parity with the Ukrainians because they're well trained by Western NATO kind of people that are well equipped and they're determined. So if you get a bunch of like demoralized conscripts who don't want to go to this war and think they're going to die, they're not going to fight real well. And it's going to be a huge drain on the Russian economy, which is already not doing great after the sanctions. So I don't see them fully mobilizing. And if they do, I don't see it being super effective. I see them losing a lot more equipment and people. And I see their image in the world like collapsing even more if like their entire mobilized military can't take out Ukraine. What I think is going to happen is that eventually the Ukrainians are going to push them back to the 2014 border. But Crimea, it's a very naturally defensible peninsula, and has very few crossings that you can get into it on. So I could see the Russians holding on to the Crimea. I don't know if that's going to be acceptable for the international community because they've been trying to turn the Crimea into like a natural like fire base to project their power into the Black Sea. And the Black Sea,
because it's that warm water port they've been trying to get since before World War One.
Yeah, it's also a way for them to kind of threaten shipping in the Black Sea if they don't get their way politically, and that has like multiple billions of dollars of shipping going across it. It's kind of like a scare tactic too. But I could see them hanging on to the Crimea, but not anything.
Now there were some attacks in Crimea, weren't there? Like it seemed like the Ukrainians didn't take they didn't say they did it. They were kind of coy about it. But it seemed like either dissidents or some sort of special forces or something were blowing up. I think it was a refinery. I can't remember. This was a week or two ago.
There was the airbase that got hit, and they lost a bunch of airframes. They're not sure if it's Ukrainian special forces, which are operating pretty much with impunity, and or if it's long-range artillery, because they have things like the HIMARS missiles at this point, which can do pretty much pinpoint strikes and have been. So like they're losing a lot of ammo dumps. They're losing bridges. They've been hit with their air force has been hit. They've lost something like 140 aircraft, and they're not going to be able to replace those.
Well, I mean, you had mentioned even at the beginning of the war, like when everybody was freaking out, you were talking about their air force, and you were like, they're not going to be able to keep them in the air very long because they cost so much just to keep them flying.
It's like 10 grand an hour for one of those jet fighters to fly around. And the other thing is that their pilots, they don't have a lot of money for their pilots to train. So a lot of these pilots are getting less than 40 hours a month in the air on these airframes. So like a week ago, there was an accident with an Su-25, which is their equivalent of our A-10, that crashed on takeoff because the guy didn't know what he was doing.
Which kind of makes I remember, you remember from months ago when they were talking about like the ghost of Kiev? Yeah,
that turned out, it turned out it was like largely a myth, but the Ukrainian Air Force is putting foot to ass in the air a lot.
Yeah, because I figured, like, when I first heard that, I'm like, okay, that's bullshit, but the Russian Air Force has not represented like we thought it would. And it seems to me that, like, if they don't have pilots that have enough flying hours to be effective, and then you add on top of that, like, it would make sense that pilots that may have more flying hours but worse equipment could take them out. So it almost makes it slightly less impressive knowing, exactly what's going on.
And the other thing is that we're seeing like a lot of like Russian Su-27s, which are kind of the outdated version of the jet fighter that they're supposed to be flying, which is like the Su-30M. And then their Su-57, which is supposed to be their F-22 killer, hasn't been seen at all in the Ukraine. So we're seeing that the Russian Air Force is also kind of a paper tiger, because the Ukrainian Air Force primarily has like MiG Fulcrums, which are like a much older jet fighter that shouldn't be able to stand up to the Russian Air Force. But because their pilots have more flight time, they have access to satellite information, and they're determined, they're putting up a really, really good fight. Even though the Ukrainian Air Force has lost a lot of airframes too in the war, I think they've lost about 130. But a lot of those are being replaced by international aid, and the Ukrainians buying surplus.
Yeah. All right. So this is, by the way, this is something else that I heard. And I checked with some of my friends, because I have friends that are on the Putin side of this thing. And one of the things that I checked with, I heard about the recruiting in prisons, and I heard about that they were buying weapons from North Korea.
That is a thing, and I'll tell you why that's a really, really bad sign from the Russians, is that the North Korean army is not a modernized army, like whatsoever. They're still using like Korean War era MiGs for their Air Force, and most of their artillery is just dumb artillery. Almost everything that the North Korean military has is Soviet era surplus. So if they're buying that, it means they're so low on equipment and munitions, they're buying stuff from like the 70s to try to replace their losses. And the North Koreans only have X amount of shells to sell them in the first place, so it's not going to last long.
So my thought on this was that early on, it was looking to me at first like Russia's going to roll them over.
Sure.
Then when that didn't happen, I was like, okay, this is going to be at a standstill for a really long time. And basically what NATO's going to do, because they're not going to be able to directly fight them, is they're just going to bleed them. And, just until the advance collapses. And then that didn't happen, and we have this massive advance. At this point, the Ukrainians are talking about taking back everything that Russia took in 2014, Donetsk, Luhansk, or however the hell you say it, Crimea, and demanding reparations.
Yeah.
I don't know how likely that is to happen, but I guess my thing on this, let's say that they take back everything to these provinces that Russia seized in 2014. The fighting slows down. As you said, it's probably going to slow down as they try to consolidate. Let's say that they take all of that back, and then they go, and it's looking like they're going to be able to take Crimea back, and they're going to be able to take these others. How likely do you think it would be that Putin might deploy nuclear arms?
I don't think he would do it. I mean, I've been wrong before about Putin, but
yeah, as have I.
Even if he wanted to at that point, it would be an admission that his army had completely failed. It would also have to go through military commanders. And I think there's enough rational people in Russia, in the regime, to realize that deployment of nuclear weapons, deployment of nuclear weapons would make it even worse on them than they are now as an international pariah, and maybe actually bring NATO into the war explicitly.
So basically, you don't think it's a possibility that nuclear... Well, that's good, because that's the thing that I've been mostly worried about.
Yeah.
This whole time. One of the things that my friend... so I have another friend who's military.
Sure.
He's not military, but he's from a military family. His dad is high up in intelligence. And so, and he's very enmeshed in military culture. So he and I were freaking out together over this whole thing. And one of the things that he told me essentially was that nuclear weapons have somewhat been overblown. Not in the sense that, nuclear war would still be catastrophic and, world ending, but an actual nuke, you drop it, you wipe out a couple of miles, but it's not like you destroy an entire city with one or two bombs. Even in the case of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, those were very, very compact, contained areas, and that was why they were able to be destroyed with singular bombs. Whereas, if you tried that on a normal city, it would take quite a few. I don't know if you have any knowledge about that, but that seemed to be what his impression was of the nuclear arms. It was okay, if they hit us, what's that really going to look like? And so we were having that conversation.
So the Hiroshima bomb was about 15 kilotons, so of TNT. The modern battlefield use nukes that you're going to find are 20 megatons. So it's about 1,000 times more powerful than what was dropped on Hiroshima.
Well, shit.
Yeah. And there's MIRVs and all kinds of awful shit that I could scare you guys with, but I won't bother. The scary thing about nukes, if you're not in a major city or near a military base, isn't necessarily the blast. The scary thing is the fact that if we did a full-blown nuclear war, we'd be living in fallout, and we'd all probably die from the environmental impact.
Right. So they're not just the radiation, but also the inability to get food, water, medical supplies, that kind of thing.
Yeah. You're probably going to die of radiation poisoning.
And if you let's just say, how far should you be living from a city if you don't want to get irradiated?
1 to 200 miles.
Holy shit. Okay, I'm dead.
Yeah, is what I would recommend. And I mean, but the 50-mile blast radius, and then the fallout. It also depends on the wind.
Okay, and this would make sense because what my guy was telling me, his dad is up there in the years, so his knowledge of nuclear armaments and tactics is probably out of date with yours. Well, shit. I was feeling a little bit better after that.
But it's not going to happen. I'm sure. I mean, in the past, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, there was a guy who was ordered to launch on a Soviet sub, and he told his commander to go have relations with himself. It's happened in the Americas too. There was one guy who was ordered to launch because they found birds on the radar, and they thought they were warheads coming in, and he refused to launch. There's still a human element to nukes, is what I'm telling you. It's not like the president pushes a button and the nukes fly. It's the president pushes the button and then the guys get activated. So there's a contingency there.
And now I have heard something, and you can tell me if this is correct or not. But it's that the at least for the United States, like nuclear weapons are kind of the dumping ground for all the idiots that nobody likes.
I've never known anyone who worked in nukes, so I can't tell you that. I do know that an Air Force silo got in trouble because they ordered Domino's to the nuke room where they had the controls, and there were the guys who were supposed to be guarding it were gone, and they just left the controls like empty. So there's a lot of screw ups. The British had a bicycle lock on the button that launched their missiles for a number of years, and that was what kept somebody from pushing the button.
A bicycle,
a literal bicycle lock. Like I think somebody had their code as like 0001 to launch the nuke.
This is, by the way, guys, this is how you know we're not living in a simulation. If anybody was actually making this, like, no, it's still fucking stupid.
Yeah. The one that scared me is that the Soviets made suitcase-sized nukes that weren't like super powerful, but they were a suitcase-sized nuclear bomb. And I think there's like 10 or 15 of them that went missing, and they never knew what happened to them.
Oh, fuck. Yeah. Well, that kind of almost reminds me, there was like that whole, and maybe they were actually pulling from this. If you watch Hunter x Hunter, they use a tactical nuclear weapon like towards the end of season 5.
Yeah, I mean, or Cyberpunk 2077, you get one of the suitcase nukes in one of the missions.
So, all right. So let's say we're looking at this right now. The Ukrainians are kind of riding pretty high off of their huge victory. The Russians have not been able to really strike back in a meaningful way. It sounds like, from what I'm hearing from you, you don't think even if they did do full mobilization, it would be particularly effective because they've just lost too many people, too many officers, and too many weapons.
And their structure is rotten in the first place. So if you're just calling guys up into a new rotten structure, you're going to get the same results over and over and over again.
Okay.
You can also only fit so many soldiers per square mile. So even if you mobilized 1 million men, like, they're in finite space.
Yeah, what are they going to do? And then also you've got the thing that these are conscripts who are not ideologically motivated. From what I've heard, and I've been listening to, and again, I guys, I do not know this to be the facts, but like I've been watching some supposedly Russian and Ukrainian YouTubers talking about this situation, and one of the things that I had heard was that essentially. So Russia, and again, I've never been there, but apparently one of the tactics that Putin supposedly has been using to control the Russians is kind of the opposite of what the Americans have been doing to control Americans. In America, they have been working tirelessly to hyper-politicize everyone and everything so that we're constantly at each other's throats and we can't team up against them. The Russians have kind of been doing the opposite. Where they have been working specifically to depoliticize the average Russian citizen to the point to where, I think in Russia, the anecdote was that most Russians are more angry about possibly not being able to get the iPhone 14 because of sanctions than like the massive military defeats they've been having. Now, I don't know that to be the case. But from what I understand, one of the things that Putin has done in how he's sort of managed his country is that he's gotten it to where that essentially, like when he declared the special military action, he had about 50% of the population support. If he had declared no military action, he would have still had 50% of the population support. Maybe not the same people, but it still would have been about 50%. And so I don't know what would happen if he surrendered, and I don't see him as surrendering. And I'm not sure it's realistic that he's going to be forced out. So from here on out, if things go as well as they possibly could for Russia, what do you see happening with this war? And then if things go, let's say, as well as they could for Ukraine, what do you see happening?
The best case for Ukraine is that they take back all of the territory that they've lost since 2014. The reason that they won't invade Russia for multiple different reasons. One, they don't actually want to like subjugate the Russian people. The other one is that international aid will probably dry up if they invade, because we don't want that kind of destabilization. Best case scenario for Russia, they keep some or all of their 2014 gains, but I don't see them actually taking Kiev and like installing a new government. The other thing is that they have to worry a lot now about their CTSO alliance that's kind of breaking down because their partner countries don't see them as a guarantor of safety and security, and they're going off on their own. Their international standing is, I don't think they can salvage it because we've seen that their military is a paper tiger and that they've become an international pariah. Their relations with Western Europe, even if Western Europe still has to buy gas from them, are going to be strained for decades. It's going to take at least a decade, if not more, for them just to replace their equipment losses, and maybe longer for them to actually reform their military and actually train it up to the point where it is even like a fraction of what they claimed it was. The best case scenario for Russia right now is that I think they hang on to what they have now, and that's going to cost a lot of blood and treasure. I don't see them hanging on to anything in the South, to be honest with you. Eventually, they're going to probably cut their losses. I don't think Putin will be forced out over this, but he might be forced to make some concessions, which might weaken his imperial power a little bit.
Which has been what I've been hearing too. I think so. From what I understand, very few people actually want Putin out because a Russia without Putin is bad for everyone. In kind of the same way of like, you take out Saddam Hussein, look what happens. You know, you don't want the largest country in the world, you know, descending into chaos. And I think freaking Putin has been running that country since I was in high school. And again, guys, gray. So like, you know, and he's only recently started to really show his age. There was a meme I found in the wild. I think I shared it on Twitter, but it was a picture of Putin sitting there like after the Ukrainian advance, and he was making a very similar face to the one that George Bush made in that famous like meme where he was just like, and it's like, I accidentally the whole economy.
I saw a good one today where it was Zelensky talking to Putin. He's like, "Hey Vlad, you want to hear a joke?" "Sure." "Ukrainian land." He's like, "I don't get it." "And you never will."
Wow. Oh, that's bad. That's bad. That's like my fucking aunt.
I found it funny. Maybe I'm getting old.
Yeah, we both are. Holy shit. Okay, cool. So basically, you think if things go really well for Ukraine, you know, you think they will take back all of their lost territory, hopefully, you know, including Crimea. If they go very well for Russia, Russia will hang on to what it got in 2014, and it won't be able to take anything extra. What do you think is the most likely outcome from here on out?
The Russian military is going to try to turn this from a war of maneuver into a war of position because their military is incapable of maneuver. We've learned that. So they're going to they were trying to do that in the first place. They were trucking in a lot of bunkers. So they're going to want to try to make it as costly as possible for the Ukrainians to take any more territory. At the same time, their forces are in disarray. All the reports I've seen of Russian soldiers on the ground is that their equipment is in terrible shape. They're being treated very poorly. They're not being rotated properly off the line. They're suffering just horrendous material misery. So I don't think that's going to work for them. I think that they're going to see a lot more Russian war crimes because the soldiers are going to be frustrated by losing a war and they're going to take it out on the civilians, and the Russian government basically endorses war crimes. So you're going to see a lot of really brutal, horrific stuff happen to Ukrainian civilians. The Ukrainian infrastructure is going to take a very long time to rebuild, and it's probably going to be done with a lot of loans from Western interests. So that's going to bring Ukraine more into the NATO fold. If Russia's strategic goal was to stop Ukraine from becoming a NATO country or a NATO ally, they failed miserably. If they wanted to achieve that goal, the best way to do that would have been to not do imperialist invasions of their neighbors. We've seen the Scandinavian countries abandon neutrality and basically become NATO members. So Russian security situation is more tenuous than it was, and their alliances are crumbling, and their status as a superpower, or a great power at least, have kind of vanished. So you're going to see Russia try to rebuild its military infrastructure and economic infrastructure over the next 10 or 15 years, which is going to carry them through Putin probably dying.
So because there's a few rumors, and again, rumors. One rumor is that Putin has a brain tumor, and that's why he did this. The other one that I think is a little bit more credible is he just kind of bought into his own, his own bullshit.
Well, he's also 69 years old, so he doesn't
Yeah.
have that much longer to go.
Exactly. And like, I mean, famously, the things that the czars did before the USSR, before the bullshit, like the things that the czars did was they did one of two things or both, ideally, which is they had a son and they expanded the Russian Empire. Putin failed at having a son. He does have a daughter that apparently he's been, training up.
Two daughters.
Two daughters.
Hmm.
But no sons. And so, I think one of the reasons he made them, he did this attack when he did it, the way he did it was he's looking to his legacy.
Yeah.
He's looking to try to rebuild kind of, the Warsaw Pact sort of countries. And that's I don't think there is any realistic world where that is ever going to happen.
It's off the table at this point. Well, and another thing I will point out to you is that if you go back in time far enough, you read Xenophon, he actually has a great quote: all tyrants fear assassination. And for that reason, you don't see tyrants cultivate successors. So someone like Putin, even if he did have a son, isn't going to cultivate him as a successor. Stalin famously didn't cultivate his son as a successor because they don't want there to be an option other than them.
Right. Oh, that's so dumb.
Yeah, if you watch Death of Stalin, Stalin's son is like a dissolute drunk, and that's actually pretty true to life.
Yes, though I will also say Death of Stalin, notoriously bad history.
Yeah, but it's hilarious.
I'll have to watch it. I just know that one of the YouTubers that I follow who is not, I mean, like he's vaguely progressive, but he's not like a lefty or anything, and he's just like, no, fuck this movie.
They compress a lot of time and do some stuff that didn't happen, but it is a very fun film.
I look forward to hopefully getting the Darude movies out and then getting historians mad at me.
Yeah, that's how you know you made it.
All right, so I'm going to go through some of the comments really quickly, guys. Thank you all so much for coming and listening to me and Bobby talk this through. This is definitely a subject that I have wanted to have, and to have this conversation kind of, in the public sphere. What I think is hilarious, by the way, was Nick Fuentes. One of the things he tried to get Destiny to bet him that like Putin would basically, so the bet originally was that Putin would achieve his goals, and Destiny was like, okay, what goals are you talking about in this thing? And essentially what Nick eventually came down to was, he was like, well, Russia will still have the stuff that it had in 2014. So I think it's hilarious that his surefire bet is now, in your opinion, the best possible outcome for Russia.
Which is probably not going to happen. Yeah.
I don't think it's going to happen either, because honestly, I think that the international community is looking to punish Russia after this. And if they're not looking to do that, they're stupid.
Well, you mentioned Westphalianism earlier, and this is really like a triumph of the post-World War II kind of neo-Westphalian order over a country that's trying to like assert unilateral will over over an area. Because while NATO isn't directly involved, the entire most of the international community is basically on the side of relative liberty and sovereignty against Russia's imperialism. So it's a success of the system at this point, and it shows you that even though a country might be materially powerful like Russia, they can't defy the will of pretty much every other country that's a major power in the area.
Yeah. And war is really hard. I mean, at this point, like, Putin kind of reminds me of that guy. He's like the guy who's like sitting there. He's like, oh man, if I didn't have my girlfriend or my wife, I would be getting laid left and right. You got no idea. Like if we just broke up, it would be. And then like, he actually breaks up with his girlfriend and is fucking miserable and can't get a date. Like, it very much seems like that. Like he felt like he had this super powerful military, this great intelligence apparatus, and he was so much smarter and more committed than his decadent Western opponents. And that illusion has completely shattered in one of the most humiliating ways I can imagine.
Yeah.
That said, it also took the lives of, oh fuck, I don't know. We don't know how many Ukrainian soldiers, something like,
we won't know, but tens of thousands of probably civilians have died. This is a humanitarian tragedy. Like we talk and we smile that the fascists are losing, and we should, but at the same time we should remember that like thousands of people had their lives cut short for the will of one tyrant to try to get his rocks off.
To try to move an imaginary line
100
or so more miles down this is why nationalism is poison. This is why countries and the state are bad. Like, because we get these fucking idiots into power. Because, guys, there is something that I have noticed that a lot of people like to do. And they like to get really excited about people and be very inspired by them. And what happens is that we project a level of competence, intelligence, and will, and drive onto people that doesn't exist. It's the reason why, like, the freaking Elon Musk nerds think he's going to take us to Mars. It's why during Obama's time in the White House, I saw like all of the freaking progressives and liberals sitting there being like, oh, just you wait. Obama's going to start doing what he really wants to do. And I will never forget this, because, this was early. I was politically a baby. I was new in New York, and I think Osama bin Laden had just been killed. And I was having a conversation with BZ Douglas, the awesome musician and independent reporter up in Cleveland, who's been on the channel. You've talked to BZ quite a few times.
He's a great guy. I like him a lot.
Yeah, super smart. He was instrumental in like my political awakening as an anarchist. And one of the things he said to me was, I had sort of repeated this sort of liberal talking point, where I was like, well, they're saying that Obama can't really do what he wants to do. And so, this is, his chest. And BZ just looks at me and says, how fucking stupid are you? Like, I don't think he was quite that rude, but he was basically like, have you ever considered that he's doing exactly what he wants to do? Because he's the freaking president. And I was just like, oh shit. Oh no.
Good work, BZ.
Oh fuck.
I need both of you guys to watch the HBO Anarchists documentary.
Oh my god.
Where there's no anarchists.
I'm gonna get so many freaking. Okay, I remember when I saw that.
Yeah.
And I got super excited.
Yeah.
And then I realized it was about ANCAPs. And I was like, oh shit, fuck, and again. And then the ANCAPs were just crowing. They were so excited that they were the anarchists. And then, like, they instantly started disavowing the show.
Yeah.
I think around the time somebody died.
Well, I think the impression, I haven't finished it, but I think I remember the story is that they went to Mexico, and I can't remember the town name.
Oh shit.
Acapulco.
Yeah.
Anarchapulco, they called it. And two of them were trying to
I know a guy that went there.
Yeah, they were trying to sell weed and bongs without permission from anybody. So it worked out as well as you think it would.
Yeah,
that
don't. That
wouldn't work in New York.
That
wouldn't work in like New York, much less Mexico.
Yeah. Oh, holy hell!
You guys should also watch Edge Runners, because I'm trying to put together a panel on that.
What the hell is Edge Runners? I just am imagining people running on the edge of things, or something that I probably can't say because it's a little blue.
Oh no! Do you remember Cyberpunk 2077? We did a review on it.
Yeah.
They did a tie-in anime set in that universe.
Oh.
Yeah.
I would watch that.
It's
is
very
Keanu
good.
Reeves in it?
No, I'm sad he didn't turn up.
That's all right.
Yeah.
He's off funding some karate dojo or something.
I will warn you, if you're listening to this, Edge Runners is not for children. There's a lot of explicit violence and other stuff.
The worst thing, by the way, about being like a fucking edgelord artist and playwright, is you grow up, you become a professional, you create all of this edgy art designed to appeal to adults.
Yeah.
And you have a kid. And your kid wants to read daddy's comics.
When you're in high school, son.
Yeah. Well, I've already freaking ruined him. My son at this point basically has the same. He's discovered the word death.
Oh, God.
And he has basically become a metalhead without like Like he's he's Death Clock as a 4-year-old.
Is he moshing at the Wiggles concert?
No, oh, that would be awesome. But no, he's just he's at this point in his mind, death means extreme, awesome, badass, you know,
like Riders of Rohan kind of thing.
Yeah. And so he will come up and he'll be like, Daddy, I'm going to get all of the booties to the death.
I watched Terminator 2 when I was like 5, so
yeah, well, and look what happened, Bobby.
Yeah.
By the way, apparently the Terminator was in Terminator 2 was made a cop because James Cameron fucking hates cops.
Yeah. Well, also they ruined the twist of Terminator 2 in the trailer. If you watch the movie again, right? If you're thinking about watching the movie, at the beginning you're thinking Schwarzenegger is a Terminator, so he's going to kill John Connor, and that the other guy must necessarily be a human. So you were meant to not know that Schwarzenegger is the good guy until the scene in the mall. But they ruined it in the trailer, and they showed that the other actor's name I can't remember is
the X-Files guy.
Yeah, so they ruined that in the trailer, and it's a little.
And he did that run. All right, so by the way, I'm going to tell you guys, this is a little bit deep cut in Brenton Lengel lore. I had a cab moment. So I have, in my old age, I have begun to mellow a little bit on police. In that I had friends who were police officers like Captain Ray Lewis, who was arrested with us at Occupy Wall Street, wonderful guy. I had at least one good run-in with a police officer, and I was just like, maybe I'm being, just a little too reactive about this shit. So I get back from Dragon Con, and I have COVID. And I have brain fog, and I need to get my antivirals. So, and Bobby, you have you heard part of this story yet?
I have. You know where I'm
going with this? Okay.
Yeah.
So I need to get my antivirals. So I get in the car, and I start driving, and I am listening to music. I get up to the like a light, and it's like a green light to the right. The car in front of me turns on the arrow. I follow the car. Immediately afterwards, the arrow goes away midway through, and the other lane starts driving, and a guy kind of has to swerve a little bit to get around me. And I'm just like, oh, well, that fucking sucks. Good thing, he was just starting and I just started. So there was no chance of like an actual accident. He had accelerated enough. Be more careful next time. So I'm just sitting there driving. I'm trying to get to, where my pharmacy is. And, I'm listening, I'm grooving out to my buddy Zach's band. I've mentioned them several times, the Dog Park Dissidents. I'm literally listening to their song Class Struggle, which is a fucking banger. So I'm listening to Class Struggle, and I look up, and I see like fucking 3 police cars directly behind me with their fucking sirens going. And I'm like, oh, okay, they must be going somewhere. So I'm just like, okay, I turn, the car slightly over to the side to let them pass. And then I see them pull in behind me. I'm like, well, shit. And I'm looking around. I'm like, what the fuck happened? Was I speeding? So I stop the car. The cops get out. And the one comes around and is like knocking on my window, and I'm like, hang on, I'm trying to write out, I have COVID, so that I don't fucking infect this guy. At which point he's like, gets super mad and fucking slams on my window. He's about to bust it. So I like lower the thing. I'm like, officer, I have COVID. And he's like, I don't care. You know how far you led us on a chase? And I'm like, I didn't lead you on a chase. What are you talking about? And he's like, we were trying to get you for miles. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. And he's like, you didn't hear me? What do you mean you didn't hear 3 police guys? Are you fucking deaf? And I go, yes. He's so fucking pissed at me. And it's like the other cops are there, and they're being a little bit more rational and reasonable. They saw I had a USAA insurance, and immediately asked me if I was a veteran. I'm not. Probably should have lied. but my dad's, I'm a military brat. So they, anyway, they got a little bit nicer to me because of that. And then, like, the guy was sitting there, he's like, aren't you supposed to be in quarantine? And I'm like, yeah, officer, I am. This was going to be, and he's like, what are you doing out? I'm like, well, this was going to be no contact until now. Yeah. So anyway, long story short, they did not arrest me, thank God. I think partially because of the way I handled it, and also like I didn't get mad or anything. Like I talked to them. I didn't respond to their aggression with fear or more aggression. Partially because I was fucking COVID loopy. But like also I think they probably just didn't want to tackle me and arrest me because I had fucking Omicron.
Oh, Jesus.
Which was, oh my God, guys, do not get the freaking booster for
Yeah.
Omicron. Do it right now. Like this shit, this is the first time I've gotten COVID. The actual COVID, I'm double vaxxed and boosted. The actual COVID itself, besides like, I mean, obviously it's worse than it felt like to me because like, I had the brain fog and I nearly got myself arrested just trying to get my antivirals. Don't drive when you've had COVID. You will feel like you can. Don't. But like immediately after I get done, and I'm like, it's been like 10 days and it's out of my system and I'm starting to get my energy back and the brain fog is lifting. And I'm just like, whew. And I took a picture. I did the COVID test. It's gone. I posted on Facebook. I'm like, it's over with the negative test. And then the next day, boom, worst sinus infection I've had in my entire life. Like I'm literally sitting there like having to purposefully overdose and mix like decongestants just to get to the point where I can breathe. And I'm sitting there at one point, I'm like, if this gets any worse, I'm going to urgent care. Like that's how fucking bad it was. So I have been knocked out for like 2 weeks straight from this shit.
Damn. Yeah, I was the same way. Don't feel bad about getting pulled over though. I drink Perrier waters because I'm fancy. And I've been pulled over like 5 times
because they
think it's a beer, and they're always so disappointed in me. Like I actually had to get a relative's apartment building had a fire in it, and I showed up to do moral support, I guess. And the cop recognized me. He's like, "You're the Perrier guy." I'm like, "Yeah, I am."
Yes. So really quickly, my hearing aids are about to give out, so that I can quit doing the
talking
but
thing.
before we go, Bobby, you want to plug your pluggables. Let's wrap this up. What's your takeaway on all this?
Yeah, I'm Mustache Mafia on YouTube, Mustache Bob 2 on Twitter. You can hit me up there. Ideally this week, I'm looking for one of the guy I was going to have on kind of fell through, so I'm looking for another co-host. I'm going to do an in-depth, detailed dive on who is the Wagner Group. Also looking for some people to talk about edge runners. The takeaway from this is that an imperialist power in Russia has been checked by the world historic bravery of the Ukrainian people, and through international cooperation and common defense of flawed but necessary liberty in the Ukraine, a people that have been brutally colonized for hundreds of years, who've only won their independence in 1991 after the Soviet Union collapsed, have defeated Russian imperialist invasion. And I think that's something that we should all celebrate. But at the same time, we all should mourn for the innocent people that have been slaughtered in the name of imperialism just to get Putin's rocks off. And we should always remember that an attack against one is an attack against all in a scenario like this. So that quote I said in the beginning, normally I might say like the Ukrainian government should be reformed or maybe even like replaced by something better. But in the situation where an imperialist fascist power invades them and starts slaughtering their civilians, that we should all fight to the death to preserve their liberty. Do not go and be a foreign fighter if you have anything going in your life. And yeah, I'm sure you do. You are loved by somebody out there, kids. If you feel like you're not, I'm sure you are. Don't experience war unless you absolutely have to, because it has affected me in ways that I don't have time to go into. But just know that there are other ways that you can help with humanitarian aid, donating money to various people that are doing very good work in the Ukraine or in other conflict zones around the world. But we should also be happy that fascism is being checked in a material way by the current world order. That's where I'm at.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm happy that we're not going to die in a nuclear holocaust.
That's always good.
Yeah. So, guys, after all this, I just put a link into the chat. I'm going to also add it to the description of this video. So, Snow White Zombie, my flagship series, is being released in comic stores this coming October. Last I saw it's October 12th. My publisher told me it would be closer to the 20th, so it may not be that, but look for it. Starting with Swaza issue 0. If you want to help me continue to fund the Swaza series, I'm working on funding number 7 right now. I am releasing a special edition book on Zoop. It's going to be launched in just a few days. We were just getting a couple of, I's dotted and T's crossed. But click on the link. It's going to take you to Zoop. It is a crowdfunding site. Put your email address in to be notified. Even if you don't want to buy the book, that will really, really help things out. And if you can, the new cover is badass, and you will have a special edition right before the series. We're doing a 6-issue run in comic shops nationwide. Check that out. If anyone is going to be in the Cincinnati area for Cincinnati Comic Expo, I am going to be there with Snow White Zombie Apocalypse, some of the last copies of the original printings, and also Derudi's Shadow of the People. I may also even have my new series. I won't have the comics of it, but I will be repping it. I'm very, very excited about that. So do follow that. Please comment, subscribe. It's always wonderful to talk to you guys and to kind of have these high-level conversations because quite frankly, as you guys have seen with some of the shit I've had to deal with on Modern Day Debate, the state of YouTube discourse, both on the right and the left, more on the right than the left, is garbage. No one is having deep conversations about these kinds of things. No one is really breaking the world down in this kind of way. And so, I really appreciate that you guys, give me and, I'm just an idiot who makes comics, but Bobby, 2-time combat vet, the chance to really give some analysis that you would not necessarily hear on mainstream television. And hopefully we can cut through the propaganda on both sides. Keep striving for a better, saner, more compassionate world. Keep, making the argument and keep, by all means, the most important thing is that you guys continue to think critically and think for yourself and encourage other people too. And also like and subscribe to my YouTube channel and hopefully help me keep making the comics because those are fun. I found if people give me money, I do really cool shit with it and give it to them. So, thank you guys very much. This has been Insurrection with Brenton Lengel, special Ukraine edition. I hope to be streaming more now that I am no longer sick. And I will also be at more comic conventions coming up. I'm looking to do one every couple of months, possibly as many as one a month going forward. So hopefully, if I happen to come to your city, would love to see you and meet you and, get a drink and talk politics and comics.
Yeah. Wear a gas mask, brother.
Oh, yeah. Well, no, a guy at Dragon Con did that actually and still got COVID. Possibly because he shared a hotel room with me.
He can't take it off. That's the trick.
Yeah. Well, he for the most part didn't. I think he did. Yeah. I was in there on a CPAP, which I think might have protected him, but he still got it. Fucking Omicron is brutal.
It's awful.
I am going to get the vaccine as soon as possible. I think they want you to wait 3 months after you get sick to maximize your resistance. But I may get it sooner than that. All right. Thank you guys very much. Hopefully there will be another debate coming up soon. James of Modern Day Debate. And also, I will be taking part on the first in a celebrity charity Dungeons and Dragons stream for disabled gamers and disabled veterans.
Well, that's the one I'm going to be at too, right?
Yeah. Oh, yes. And Bobby's doing it too.
Yeah.
This is going to be some really fun. The last time I did this, I was on with a guy from Star Trek, like from the new Star Trek. And we became friends. It involved a lime. You can look it up. And American Johnson, non-compete, played a goblin and literally like put on like the outfit and painted himself green and gave himself ears and shit. It was a beautiful thing. So I'm looking forward. I think it will be just as cool this time, if not cooler, and some even bigger names are involved going forward. So definitely check that out. Keep an eye on my social media for that. I'll definitely be tweeting and posting about it. So thank you guys from me to you. Oh, hang on. Oh, yeah. Hey, Brenton. I basically missed your entire stream so far. I'm going to jump back and watch it. But yeah, you're going to say, hi. I was the one thing, make sure you go all the way back to the beginning because I cursed Bobby with my wand.
Yeah, you tried.
Yeah, which is made of jade and some kind of wood.
That doesn't puncture the chest hair.
Yeah. Well, also could use it as a stake.
I guess.
I promise I will not stake any vampire leftists. One of these days, fun fact, Bobby, one of these days I got the idea that like you do a vampire movie, but you do it like based around a vampire who's basically like a leftist. It's like, hey, we probably shouldn't be eating human blood, guys. This is kind of messed up. And everybody's like, shut up, you're ruining everyone's fun.
Oh, so a Bruja.
Yeah. Oh, all right. Well, this has been great. It's been terrific to see you. Hey, Progressive American, always happy to have you here.
Hey, Connor.
Jumped, great stuff. The guy who came in with the Russian propaganda, Mr. Chip, dude, I understand and I appreciate your candor. But a lot of this stuff, you're just repeating shit other people have said, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like, I understand that, you know, there's some fucked up shit about Ukraine. I am still very disturbed by Azov, and I'm sort of the mind that they should put Azov directly on the front lines in a position to get killed. Because like fucking Nazis. But the fact of the matter is that there are more anti-Semites in Russia than in Ukraine. Russia has their own Nazi unit.
They have the biggest Nazi movement in the world in Russia.
Yeah, I know that Putin has sold it on this, and he's doing it for a very particular reason, because there's a lot of glory associated in Stalin defeating the Nazis. He's trying to play off of those themes, but the fact of the matter is it's just not true. As I said, once this war is over, I will be opposing the Ukrainian state, just like I oppose every state on the freaking planet. But at the same time, I am somebody who very much believes in a people's right to association and disassociation, and you can't go invading countries and threatening nuclear war if you're not stopped. That throws absolutely everything out the window. And thank God, like I said, even if Vladimir Putin was the good guy that tankies think he is, even if he was that guy, even if he was fighting Western imperialism and fascism, the fact that he's threatening nuclear war and the fact that a Russian victory would have made nuclear war more or less inevitable in my mind, I think it throws absolutely everything else out the window. So even if I believe this propaganda that he puts out, and I don't, and it's not true, it's obviously propaganda, but even if it was true, a Russian victory is still not something anybody sensible wants. So most important thing now, I think, is to bring the conflict to an end as soon as possible and save as many lives as possible. And I don't know what that looks like. And sadly, nobody asked me. So yeah, this has been Insurrection with Brenton Lengel. Check out the comic book. And also, by the way, Mr. Chip. I didn't mean to bark at you too hard there. You're still absolutely welcome on the channel. I hope you continue to challenge yourself and to challenge, some of these beliefs, because I think your heart's in the right place. So thank you for that and for your candor. But I do think you are deeply mistaken. All right. Thank you guys very much. I will catch you out. Peace.